The views expressed in this interview represent solely the opinions of the guest and do not represent that of Pinnacle Digest or its parent company. Pinnacle Digest, including myself and its employees, are not investment advisors, and any reference to specific securities in this interview does not constitute a recommendation thereof. Before investing in any securities, you should consult with your financial advisor and a registered broker-dealer. Nothing in this interview should be construed as a solicitation to buy or sell any securities or commodities. This interview may contain technical or other inaccuracies or omissions. In light of that, all statements in this interview are to be checked and verified by the viewer. The information in this interview is of an impersonal nature and should not be construed as individualized advice or investment recommendations. We do not guarantee that any of the companies or commodities mentioned in this interview will perform as stated, and any comparisons made to other companies or commodities may not be valid or come into effect. All statements in this interview, other than statements of historical fact, should be considered forward-looking statements. These statements relate to future events or future performance. Much of this interview is comprised of statements of projection. These statements involve known and unknown risks, uncertainties, and other factors that may cause actual results or events to differ materially from those anticipated in such forward-looking statements. Today I'm sitting down with Peter Schiff at his home here in Connecticut to talk about his bank, Euro Pacific Bank, gold, the Fed, and politics. Peter, thanks for having me.
Alex, thanks for coming down to Connecticut.
Yeah, I'd like to just get your take first and foremost on BitGold. It's a relatively new platform. It's only been around for a month or two. Can you talk about that and your bank, Euro Pacific Bank, and some of the how they're relatable, why you created your bank, and what it allows customers to do?
Sure. Well, there's certainly a lot of hype around BitGold up there in Canada. It is a new platform, but it's hardly a new idea. Even before my bank opened up, when I wrote my book, Crash Proof, that came out in 2007, I wrote about the concept of how I thought we could go back to a gold standard, because I wrote that it would be very easy for banks to allow their customers to denominate their deposits in gold and give them a debit card. Because everybody knows when you take a debit card, if you're European and you take your debit card to Canada, you can go into a store, a restaurant, and you can buy something and charge it. Right? You don't necessarily have any Canadian dollars in your bank account. You might have euros. But behind the scenes, the bank does the conversion.
And it works, yeah.
Right. So I said, well, why can't they do the same thing with gold? Why can't you just have gold in your bank account and using a debit card, just spend it the same way? Because the problem with gold is if you have an ounce of gold and it's worth $1,200 US and you want to buy something for $100 US, well, you're going to shave off some gold. But if the bank stores it and then they can break down your deposit into fractional units of gold, then it's no problem. Right? So I wrote about this idea, and then when I got around to launching my own offshore bank in 2012, which I did for many reasons, but mainly to give international investors a way to invest with me other than my U.S. broker-dealer, where the regulations were becoming very cumbersome and made it difficult for me to deal, let's say, with someone in Australia or Germany. So I wanted to have an offshore platform, but rather than just set up a brokerage firm, I set up a bank, which also had a brokerage subsidiary. So when you open up a bank account with Euro Pacific Bank, not only do you have a bank account that's protected by the secrecy and privacy rules of St. Vincent's and the Grenadines, but you also have a brokerage account. And my bank customers can trade stocks, bonds, commodities, forex, whatever they want. Right? And we offer a wide variety of banking services, including merchant-related services. Now, once I had my own bank, I thought, wait a minute. Nobody has put my idea into implementation. Right. So back in 2012, I was the first bank to offer a GoldBacked debit card. And I followed up with a silver-backed debit card. Now, under the gold program, we provide free storage of your precious metals. If you want silver, silver is a little bulkier, so we do have to charge a storage fee for silver, but it's competitive with the storage fees that anybody else would charge to store your silver. Right. Yeah. But it does add up over time, so it makes more sense to use gold. Right? And silver is something that's easier to just transact in on its own, because silver doesn't have as much value. You can have a silver quarter or a silver dime in the United States made before 1965, and you can spend that silver more easily than you can barter your gold. But the reason we actually launched the silverback card program is because we had some demand for it. Some of our customers were saying, "Hey, I love the program. I'd rather own silver." I say, fine. But the main reason that we introduced this concept, it wasn't so people could, use their gold to go buy a cup of coffee, right? The idea that somebody's going to buy gold and then the next day spend it, that's nonsense.
Isn't that the point, to allow customers to do everyday transactions?
Well, that might be the way BitGold is trying to sell it, but somebody who's been in that business for a couple of years now, I can tell you that that's really not what customers are going to be doing. I mean, maybe in the future, if we've had a complete monetary breakdown, and you can't, and nobody even wants fiat currency. If you go into a store and everything is for sale only in gold,
and that's
right?
what you're banking on
Well,
eventually.
I'm not banking on that, but that very well may happen in the future. But in the here and now, right? Nobody is going to buy gold, even if it's a 1% commission, right? And the next day sell it and pay another 1% to buy a cup of coffee when they have dollars. See, you spend your currency first. If you think gold is a better store of value than a fiat currency, Gresham's law says that you're going to spend the bad money, right, and you're going to hoard the good money. So people that want to buy gold recognize gold as a long-term store of value. So the point of the debit card, and this is why I launched it, is I wanted to tell my customers, look, if you buy gold from me, you can store your purchasing power until you need it. When you need it, you can access it using this debit card, which means you don't have to look for a buyer, you don't have to wait for a check or a wire. You know, at a Saturday night at 11 o'clock, if you have an emergency and you need $1,000, you can get it. So if somebody bought, let's say, $50,000 worth of gold from my bank, and they have my debit card in their wallet, they're carrying around $50,000 worth of gold. They can spend any portion of it anytime they want. Now, they're not going to, but the fact that you have the capability of doing it, that's what gives you the value. Now, is it possible for somebody to just have their whole life in gold? And at my bank, when my new platform launches in October, it will be possible for somebody to basically have their employer.
Be on the gold
Yeah,
standard,
you can have your employer, if he has an account with my bank, he can pay you in gold.
Right.
If your landlord will accept gold, you could pay rent in gold. You can buy all your stuff in gold, either directly or using your debit
The
card.
merchant would have to be linked up with your
With my bank, yeah. All the parties have to have an account at my bank, so we can apply the appropriate regulatory scrutiny.
Right.
But it will be possible. But most people aren't going to do that. The whole idea is that you can save your gold, but you can seamlessly transact with the fiat world. Because when one of my bank customers goes into a ATM machine or a restaurant and he uses his card, the waiter doesn't know that you've got gold behind that debit card. Now, what's going to improve, and this is something that I'm going to improve on, the way it is right now, and this was a software problem.
What are some of the updates coming in October? Yeah.
This is a software problem because the banking software that I had doesn't recognize gold as cash, as liquid. So if somebody has gold in their account with me, they can't just use their debit card if they have no cash. If they have cash, they can use it because the cash is what spends first. But if you have no cash, and let's say you have $5,000 worth of gold, and you want to go and spend $500, right? What you have to do is you have to go into your account online and type in that you want to sell $500 worth of gold, and you hit sell, and now you have $500. That loads your card, and now you can spend that, right? That's the way it works now. But what's going to happen as a result of my software upgrades, and we should have it rolled out by October, that middle process step will be eliminated. And the minute you use your debit card, either to withdraw cash at any ATM machine that takes MasterCard, Visa, or if you spend it, the minute you do it, like let's say you go into a store and you buy
real time.
You go into a store and you buy a $500 television set, right? When you put your debit card in the machine and they approve it, it automatically sends a sell signal into your account. We liquidate the $500 worth of gold right then at the market price. And it's all going to be automated, and the spreads are going to be much thinner. I'm going to have spreads that are going to be more narrow than the spreads at BitGold. I mean, maybe for the smallest orders, we'll charge 1%, but we'll go down from there. And also, one of the things that we don't do yet, and I've been talking about this for years, I talked about it on my radio program, is once I update the software, I'm also going to include a feature that will enable my bank customers to directly exchange gold with other bank customers, which means merchants or individuals can price their products or services in gold and be paid directly in gold, bypassing the Visa, MasterCard system entirely. And we're also talking about partnering up with another company to actually create a gold-backed digital currency, which can circulate freely around the world, but can only be redeemed through my bank. So anybody could hold it, but if you actually wanted to get the gold, you'd have to take it to my bank, open up an account where we can do all the KYC, which is know your customer.
Yeah.
But then a Euro Pacific Bank account holder could take that currency and convert it into gold or currency. But other than that, it could circulate. So because right now Americans can't have an account with me. But if I create a gold-backed digital currency, an American can hold that currency.
Right.
He could spend it, but he just can't cash it in. He can't get the gold, or he can't get the dollar equivalent or the euro equivalent. You have to have an account at my bank. But people could trust that they know, oh, I've got a currency backed by gold at Europac Bank. They might accept it even if they can't cash it in because they know somebody else can cash it in. So I think I'm going to be able to seamlessly create a gold-backed digital currency in an environment where I have gold-backed deposits in my bank, where I provide free storage as well, and I get free storage. So it's going to be a platform that really nobody can match. And since I have a brokerage firm in my bank account, my depositors will be able to use their gold to buy and sell stocks. Right, they don't even have to go from gold to dollars or euros. We'll just recognize, my new software is going to recognize gold as a currency. Now, even though I think gold is money and everything else is just a money substitute, we're telling our bank that gold is a currency just like euros or dollars. And we're just going to denominate an account if they want it in gold. So it's going to be a platform that really nobody else has matched. But anybody can do it. I mean, any bank, any brokerage firm could do what I'm doing.
Why aren't they?
Because there's not enough demand. Most people don't want the hassle.
Do you think we need a dollar crisis to spur that demand?
Well, I think that as central banks around the world continue to keep interest rates at or near zero, as inflation rates continue to be a level above zero, right? That means that your money is eroding in value if you leave it in your bank. And I think more and more people are going to catch on. Hey, if I deposit my dollars or my euros or my yen in the bank, at the end of the year, I can buy less stuff because I'm getting no interest and prices are going up. And more people might wake up and say, hey, why don't I just save gold? Now, as more and more people demand gold because of competition, banks will provide it. See, my bank provides it now because there's not that many people that want it. See, that's one of the things that BitGold doesn't understand right now, is that there's not that much demand for the product. But there are no barriers to entry should the demand accelerate in the future, which I believe it will. But I believe one day in the future, all the banks will be doing this. Unless the governments go back on the gold standard and make it unnecessary. And if you go back and you go to Google and you Google Gold Bank or GoldBacked debit card, the first 2 or 3 pages are all my bank and all me. And you can see what I was saying at the time. And it was all put yourself on the gold standard, adopt a personal gold standard, don't wait for the governments to go back to the gold standard, do it yourself, right?
You've been quoted numerous times saying $5,000 an ounce. For years you've been saying that's, projecting it. At some point, gold's got a chance to go that high. Do you believe that gold investors, gold bugs, are going to have an opportunity to become rich strictly off price appreciation from gold stocks?
Well, I think if you want to get rich off of the appreciation in gold, I think gold stocks are a better way to go. I talk about gold as a way to not go broke, to preserve what you have, because I think you're going to see a currency crisis. And to the extent that gold is $10,000 an ounce, the price of everything else is going to go up too. Right. So it's in a relative basis, how much can you buy with your gold?
More of a hedge, more of an insurance policy.
Yeah. Now, I do think the price of gold will go up faster than the price of a lot of other commodities. So I do think people will achieve a higher standard of living by saving gold than saving, let's say, other commodities. And I do think people that have gold will preserve wealth and, yes, increase their wealth. But it's not like you're going to win the lottery.
Right.
Or it's not like people think, hey, some people bought Bitcoins for 10 cents a piece, 20 cents a piece, and then they were one time worth, over $1,000 a piece. So you're not going to strike it rich like that owning gold, but you're going to avoid going broke, which a lot of people are going to do. But I have been throwing out 5,000, and I do think we're going to get there, depending on when we have our dollar crisis. I mean, it could happen next year or the year after that.
Let's talk about the dollar crisis, the U.S. economy real quick. You were early to the dot-com bubble. You predicted that. You predicted the housing bubble. You've been talking about this dollar crisis that's coming. You insinuated numerous times the chickens are going to come home to roost basically before the end of Obama's second term. We're 6 months out now from 2016. How quick? I mean, you've said before too, it's better to be 5 years early than a minute late, and I agree with you on that, but the years are going by. I mean, we're coming up to the 4-year anniversary of gold hitting its high at 1900. Where do you think we stand in terms of the dollar crisis?
Well, I think we're 4 years closer than we were, right, 4 years ago. But look, all of the problems that led me to conclude that a dollar crisis was coming, they've all gotten worse, right? Over the last 4 years, because we've delayed the day of reckoning, it's come at a heavy price, right? All the problems that we should have been working to solve, we've worked to exacerbate, And so now they loom larger than ever. And of course, now that they're so big, the impetus to kick the can down the road is even greater, right? That's why I don't believe that the Fed is really planning any rate hikes, other than maybe a symbolic quarter point just to pretend they can do it. But they realize that this bubble is so big that even the smallest pin would prick it.
Yeah.
The reality is, I think the air is already coming out of the bubble just because they turned off the QE spigots, which is why I think they're going to open them back up again with QE4. But I think when people perceive this real predicament, that this is not a real recovery, this is a gigantic bubble, that the economy is not healthy, it's sicker than ever, and that we've just been talking about raising rates, but that we're trapped at the zero bound indefinitely, and we're going to be doing QE4, QE5, QE6. Remember, I said at the very beginning when they launched QE1 that we'd have more QEs than Rocky movies. And I think we had 6 of those. And if you remember, they did get progressively worse, right? The first one was pretty good, right? But so I think when people figure out how bad this is, the bottom is going to drop out of the dollar. All the speculators that loaded up on dollars because they thought the U.S. recovery was real and they thought interest rates were going to normalize and the Fed's balance sheet is going to shrink, when they realize that that can't happen and that the balance sheet is going to expand in perpetuity, then I think the bottom drops out of the dollar. I think it's going to fall precipitously, and I think gold's going to take off. And I think it's going to take out the highs from 4 years ago, and even the people who bought gold at those highs, right? Even if they didn't even average down, I think they're still going to make money, and they could make a lot of money. They won't, they make more money if they buy now, right? Or if they bought earlier. People try to criticize me. Oh, Peter Schiff, you were bullish on gold 3 or 4 years ago, and look how much money people lost if they followed your advice. Look, I started telling people to buy gold in 1999, 98, and I didn't tell them to wait until it got to 1900 and then
sell.
buy.
Yeah.
And I've always told people, don't put all your money in at any one time. Average in. I tell people 5 to 10% of your wealth in gold. So, if some of my clients bought some gold up there, okay, well, they bought some gold a lot lower. And they bought some gold more recently.
Are Wall Street and the media, are they starting to wake up? You mentioned earlier this week on your podcast, one lone analyst from Bank of America said, maybe QE3 isn't working. Yesterday, Yellen doesn't raise rates, as you predicted. Are some people starting to clue in that maybe she can't raise rates?
A little bit. That Bank of America analyst is saying, hey, the Fed's worst fear might be that, the economy weakens before they get around to raising rates. And now they have to do QE4. And they have that as, not their, most likely scenario. I think that is the most likely scenario. I mean, why do you think we did QE3? Because QE2 didn't work. And that's why we did QE2, because QE1 didn't work. So we're going to have to do QE4 for the same reasons. And the fear is that people will figure that out. See, that's why the Fed has to keep talking about raising rates. They have to pretend they can actually do it.
Well, people believe them. Everyone, now the new projections are, September, December they're looking at.
Yeah, but what they're not connecting the very obvious dots that we have such an enormous amount of debt now that the cost of servicing it with higher rates would crush the economy, and it would precipitate a worse financial crisis in 2008. This should be obvious. But, the 2008 financial crisis was also obvious, yet nobody in the mainstream saw that coming. I saw that clear as day. I could see the problem.
You think this is the most wrong Main Street, Wall Street, the media's ever been? You said this bubble?
Yeah, I think that as wrong as people were at the eve of the bursting of the dot-com bubble in 1999, 2000, as wrong as they were about the economy in 2007, mid-2008, right, as much in denial as they were, including the Fed, right, Yellen, Greenspan, I think this problem is even bigger and should be even more obvious. They're even more. Yes, and they're just as clueless, if not more so. And once again, when this happens, it's going to be the same old people saying the same old thing. Nobody could have predicted this. Whew, this came out of left field. This was impossible to know this was going to happen. But of course, it wasn't impossible.
2016 is shaping up to be potential Bush-Clinton face-off. I know you were a staunch supporter of Ron Paul. You're now firmly in Rand's corner. Would he be someone that you could step up and be an advisor for and work with?
Yeah, I'm a big supporter of Rand. In this respect, the apple hasn't fallen far from the tree, despite the fact that some people may think otherwise. I know both gentlemen, and I think I have a lot of confidence in Rand. And again, I was an economic advisor to Ron Paul's 2008 campaign, and I said, look, that's the easiest job there is, because Ron Paul doesn't need economic advice. He should be giving it to the other congressmen. And I think the same can be said from Rand. He knows his stuff. Right? He understands the problems in the economy. Whether he articulates a lot of this on the campaign trail is a different story, because when you're trying to run for office, you have to hit the themes that resonate with the voters, and understanding the real problems with the U.S. economy, they don't really fit on a bumper sticker, and they're not going to work, in a 30-second, TV commercial. But I think Rand Paul, if we actually had a financial crisis, well, look, he's got a better shot than most candidates. I mean, does he have a better shot than Bush? Probably not. I mean, if you had to be an odds maker. But, there's so many people in the field. I think the field is going to narrow considerably, and Rand is going to be there. If it narrows down to 4 or 5 candidates, Rand will be among them, right? Because he's got enough of a core constituency. A lot of the other candidates are going to be fighting amongst the same voters. But I think a lot of the Rand voters are going to be Rand voters, right? Guys like me, right? We're going to support Rand. And so he's not going to lose those. As far as what his actual chances are, look, it's tough to get the Republican nomination, and the Republicans have a long history of nominating, middle of the road type losers. I mean, look at both Bushes. I was not a fan of either Bush, and they nominated McCain, and they nominated Romney. I mean, the last good nominee was Ronald Reagan. And he won, but since Reagan, they've nominated Democrats disguised as Republicans, and this is the base of the Republican Party. Plus, you generally have to be much more hawkish, on defense, and of course, you also have to kowtow to the social conservatives, the Bible Belt, the pro-lifers, the anti-drugs, if you got more of a libertarian message, there are a lot of hardcore Republicans that are opposed to a real freedom. In a way, that makes a lot of Republicans hypocrites, because they say we want small government, but then in certain areas they want big government when it comes to national defense, or when it comes to policing, what you do in the privacy of your own home. All of a sudden they want, Big Brother. And so Rand is like, hitting the libertarian nerve, and there's some of us in the Republican Party. I've always been a libertarian/Republican, where anytime there's election, the libertarian candidate is the one that most closely appeals to me, but I know that guy's going to lose. So I have to vote for the person who comes closer among the major 2 candidates, and it's generally the Republican. In fact, it's usually always the Republican. I don't think I've ever found it where the Democrat was more appealing than the Republican. But sometimes the difference is so minor that you can barely tell. And then what do? You're just frustrated. Maybe you don't vote at all. It doesn't really matter. I mean, I live in Connecticut. It doesn't matter who I vote for. The Democrats are going to win. So I might as well just vote Libertarian, just out of spite, just vote my conscience. But we'll see. I mean, but if Rand doesn't win in 2016, which is, it's likely that he doesn't win, but I think he does elevate himself on the national stage. Right. He's still a young guy. I mean, he's my age. We're both 52. I think he's about a month older than I am. But in presidential...
If the dollar crisis happens in 2017 or 2018, he could be...
Yes, in presidential politics, a 52-year-old candidate is still a young candidate.
Very young, yeah.
And so he's only been a 1-term senator. So if he wins his seat again, he'll be a 2-term senator. And the odds of the financial crisis hitting in 2016 are not as great as it hitting sometime between now and 2020. By then, I think it's almost a sure bet that we'll have a major economic upheaval. And that will help Rand, especially if the incumbent is Hillary Clinton. Because if a Republican wins and we haven't had the crisis, and then the crisis happens, they may blame the Republicans.
Scapegoat, yeah.
But if Obama can hand the baton to another Democrat and then the thing hits the fan, it'll be ripe for a guy like, because otherwise Ron Paul is going to have to challenge the Republican incumbent in a primary, which he may be able to do, but it's hard to unseat, even if it's a disaster of an economy. I mean, Reagan tried to do that with Gerald Ford, and he couldn't do it. But then he went on to win in 1980 after losing in the primary to Ford in 76. So it's possible that Rand could have a longer-term process. But I think the best situation for him is that a Democrat wins in 2016, and then it's a complete collapse. Yeah. Or if the collapse happens early enough in 2016 that it can be blamed on Obama, and now all of a sudden he's got some of the credentials to say, look, this is Democrats and Republicans caused this together. I represent real change, a real change in direction. You know, and then so that could help Rand if things got really bad very quickly.
Lastly, Peter, in respect to the dollar crisis, do you think it's going to come from abroad? Who do you think is going to?
Yeah, well, absolutely. I mean,
right?
It's going to start because Americans are not going to be the first to dump the dollar.
No.
Or they'll be the last. They'll go down with the ship, right? So it has to come from abroad. It has to come from all of the dollars that are being held abroad, you know, in the form of U.S. treasuries or U.S. mortgages or just, you know, stuffed under the mattresses of international drug dealers or terrorists. You know, most of the U.S. currency exists outside the United States, right? I mean, you know, it's the currency of choice in the black market, right? But once they all lose confidence in it, because, you know, it's not legal tender other than the United States and a few rare little countries, right? It's legal tender here. Yeah. And when there's a loss of confidence, when people start to see the dollar going down, down, down daily, and they start dumping it in mass, that's where the pressure comes. Because now if we start to get pressure on the dollar, like think about what just happened in Russia, right? All of a sudden the ruble started falling.
50%, yeah.
And what did they have to do? They had to raise interest rates to 17% to stop it. Well, what would happen in America if we raised interest rates to 17%? I mean, we can't even raise them above zero, let alone 17%. I mean, Russia can afford it. We can't. I mean, even in America.
But the ruble fell for different reasons than.
No, it fell because people were losing confidence in the ruble. That's the only reason it falls, based on sanctions based on oil
tariffs,
prices. Yeah. But it all had to do with the loss of confidence in the ruble, right? But it happened in America. Go back to the 1970s, right? We talked about Ronald Reagan. When he took office, we were nearing a currency crisis. The dollar had plunged between 1971, when we went off the gold standard, and 1979, the dollar had lost 70% of its value. You know, the Swiss franc was at 23, 25 cents in 71. It was up to 75 cents, right? Look at, you know, the dollar bought 4 Deutschmarks. It went down to 1.5. You could buy 360 yen in 1971 with $1. And by the end of the decade, it was down to like 150-ish or so. I mean, more recently, the dollar got lower than that, but it was a huge decline. Gold went from $35 an ounce to $800. Oil went from $3 a barrel to $30 a barrel. And we were on the verge of a dollar crisis. And what did Paul Volcker do to stop the bleeding? 20% interest rates. That's what he had to do.
Could you imagine?
Yeah. Now, think about that today. If we got another crisis in the dollar, could we raise interest rates to 20%? Could we raise them to 10%? We can't even raise them to 5%. Think about the enormity of the debt. Think about the national debt. We have so much debt now as a nation that if interest rate went up to 5%, the government would have to default on the Treasury market. Yeah. It couldn't possibly pay the interest at 5%. It would have to default on Social Security. All the big banks that we bailed out in 2008, which are bigger now, they would all fail again. And the government couldn't even bail out the depositors. I mean, so we are powerless to prevent the currency crisis because the solution to the crisis, you know, would create a bigger one, right? It's like the cure would kill us.
Is it going to be China? Like right now, if you produce soybeans and sell them to South Africa, you know, produce soybeans in Brazil and sell them to South Africa in huge quantities, it's done in U.S. dollars. Still, for the most part, there are some countries that have found a way to get around it. But who's it going to be that says we're no longer accepting it, or how?
Interestingly enough, you know, the world is moving away from the dollar. Every year, more and more countries are striking bilateral trade agreements that exclude the dollar. I can already see that. We talked about my offshore bank. When I first started my bank, 2-3 years ago, about 70% of our transactions were in dollars, even though none of my customers are American, right? Now, only about 30% of my transactions are dollars. Wow. So, and what I'm seeing in the banking community is banks themselves are discouraging the use of dollars by making it harder to transact in them because the U.S. government has imposed such draconian rules and regulations and subjected banks to such enormous fines if they make innocent mistakes that the government is actually destroying the market for its own currency. And it's like we're biting the hands that feed us because we need people to use dollars because that's how we pay for our imports. We don't pay for them with exports. All we export is money, inflation. But if we make it too dangerous and too expensive for anybody to accept that money, we've not just shot ourselves in the foot, but in the head. And so we've accelerated this process out of the dollar. We've given the world another reason not to want the dollar.
So the gradual shift is on, and at some point, be it from China or somewhere, they're going to yell out, "The emperor's got no clothes," and it's just going to be game over, and people are going to be running from the dollar.
Absolutely. And that emperor has been stark naked for years, right? But nobody wants to admit it.
Yeah.
But I can admit it. No one cares, right? Because I'm just Peter Schiff. Who am I, right? But we need somebody of significance to state the obvious. And then everybody else will be able to say, oh, yeah, I see that he's naked too. And that moment is going to happen. That's why I say you got to be too early. You can't do it when everybody else figures out you're too late. That's why it makes sense to get your money invested in foreign assets, or get your bank account, get your long-term savings in gold in a liquid form where you can access them from your debit card. That makes a lot of sense. But don't spend your gold now. Spend your dollars, spend your euros, spend your yen on that cup of coffee. Just leave your gold safely in your offshore bank account, knowing that whenever you need it, it's there, and you can access it at a moment's notice.
Peter,
with a swipe of a debit card.
Yeah, exactly. Thanks for breaking down your Euro Pacific Bank.
Yeah, anybody wants to check it out too, it's europacificbank.com. Okay. Also, they can go to bankyourgold.com. Yeah. That bankyourgold.com will take you directly to the webpage that has to do with the gold and silver debit card program. But europacbank.com is the main site. You can open up an account online. Okay. You have to provide the proper documentation.
Yeah. How would the digital gold-backed currency work? Explain that.
Well, it would kind of work
Bitcoin, but backed by gold?
It would spend like Bitcoin, like over the blockchain, right?
Like digitally.
But the value would be fixed to whatever the price of gold was. Because that digital currency could be presented at my bank for redemption, right? So if you go back to the original currency.
Only at your bank, though.
Yes, because no one else, it's an obligation, because my bank holds the gold. So the way the currency would be created, somebody would bring money to my bank or gold, and they would buy gold, and now I would issue the currency to my depositor. Now that depositor can give that currency to anyone he wants, right? Just like if you go to a bank and you take out $10,000, the bank knows, okay, you took $10,000 out of your account. Yeah. You start spending that cash, they don't know who you spent it on, they don't know who's got it. Now if somebody wants to take the cash back to the bank, and now they know who that person is. So you know the person who takes it out, and you know the person who puts it in. But you have no idea how many people hold it in between, and that won't be my responsibility. Right. Because I only have to know the person who takes it and the person who redeems it, right? And that's the requirement that a bank has, because the bank is not required to monitor the cash that is withdrawn. And basically, what I'm doing is letting people withdraw gold, right? And this is how currency started, right? People took their gold to a blacksmith, right? And the blacksmith said, here's an IOU for gold, right? I'll store your gold. And now people would take that and they would trade it amongst each other. Not everybody would run back to the blacksmith because they didn't want to lug around the gold. They had the warehouse receipt.
Whoever ended up with it after the service is rendered could go redeem it if they so fit.
Yeah, and in fact, originally, currencies in the United States, before the Federal Reserve, banks issued their own currency, right? It was in physical form, right? So what I would be doing is the same thing. I'd be issuing my own currency backed by gold, right? It's a digital currency instead of a paper currency. But banks issued currency before governments did, right? The Federal Reserve notes were patterned after private bank notes. In fact, the Federal Reserve is private. It's not technically a government agency, and Federal Reserve notes are IOUs, right? They were originally backed by 40% gold and 100% commercial paper, and banks started issuing Federal Reserve notes as opposed to their own notes. But before the Federal Reserve system, and this is one of the reasons the Federal Reserve was created in America. Hundreds of bank notes were circulating, right? If you had a bank account, let's say in New York, and you made a deposit, they'd give you, let's say, $100, $1,000 in notes of that bank. And then you would go out to California and you say, well, do you want to spend the money? Somebody might say, well, how do I know this bank still exists? I mean, it's going to take a week just to figure out if they're still there by, whatever. Yeah. But when they came up with the Federal Reserve, the whole idea was we'll have one bank note that will replace all these other bank notes, right? Exactly. So what I'm doing with my bank is the same thing, except instead of issuing a paper currency that will circulate, I am issuing a digital currency.
Peter, thanks for joining us today at Pinnacle Digest. Appreciate your time.